Hi, my name is Lydia Harrington. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of History of Art and Architecture at BU. I'm going to talk a little bit about the PhD summer internship I did in 2019, and it was sponsored by the Office of the Associate Provost for Graduate Affairs, as well as the BU Center for the Humanities. So I was working as a curatorial researcher at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, specifically on an upcoming exhibition that they are showing on the founder of the museum, Isabella Stewart Gardner's travel albums. And the exhibition will be up in 2021, so I encourage you to go check it out then. So Isabella Stewart Gardner engaged in a number of travels around the world, spurred by personal tragedy. Her young son died in the 1860s. She couldn't have another child. So to feel a bit better, she travels to Europe and she comes back with travel albums that have her writing about her travels, drawings of what she saw, as well as photographs collected of the places she went to. And these albums eventually lead to develop her taste in what she would collect and put in the museum that we have today. So she undertook another travel in 1874 and 1875 up and down the Nile, and that was one album that I was working on, checking transcripts, doing research on the photographers whose work appears in the album, looking at her drawings. And then I was looking at a few other albums among the 30 or so albums she developed. So albums of her travels to China, Southeast Asia, India, as well as Turkey and Greece, and what we then called the Holy Land. So there was also a nice connection to my own dissertation, which is on Middle Eastern architecture in the late 19th and early 20th century. Some of the photographers in my own work appeared in her album, so it was great to be able to see what other work they were doing in the region, as well as of taking photos of the buildings that I'm working on myself. Other than that, I was also able to talk to senior curators in the curatorial department in which I was working, as well as people in other departments at the museum who are doing things like marketing or conservation of objects. So I really got a sense of how the museum worked as a whole behind the scenes and how different departments interacted with each other. I was able to, have lunch every day with other curators, in addition to talking to people, just like getting an idea of, my career trajectory. Should I go into museums? So the people at the museum were extremely, personable and very helpful in talking about what I want to do in the future and, connecting this experience to what other things I could do at the museum in the future or other museums in the area. So overall, it was like a very positive experience. Some other things I got to do were not just look at digitized versions of these very old albums, but actually look at some up close and handle the originals, which are now in not the best condition, but they will be on display in the exhibition. So also looking at the original objects. Another thing I did was talk to some middle school students about projects they were doing on Islamic architecture collections, and they had questions for me. I was able to answer some of them and talk specifically about the objects that are on display at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. So not just working behind the scenes with this exhibition, but also talking about what things are on display. So if you go to the museums, you can see the kinds of objects that she would have seen on her travels, that these travel albums eventually contributed to when she collected for the museum and opened it in 1903. She founded it as a kind of American palazzo based on museums and homes she saw in her travels to Europe, specifically Italy. So she was really trying to share her collection with the public in Boston and not just keep it to herself. So the building ended up, that she built in Fenway, ended up being based on that palazzo design. Her quarters were in the 4th floor. The collection is on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd floors, and the 4th floor is just curatorial offices today, no longer residence of the director. So I got to, really be in touch with that history of her collecting, her life, and her willingness to share what she was collecting with the public. And also get to work in a museum that was actually robbed in 1990. So a lot of different histories, not just her, but also the heist of 1990. So a lot of different Boston histories intersecting in this space. So it was a really good experience for me to be able to hone my skills in photographic history, history of manuscripts, connect my own work, kind of look at the photographic history of the 19th and early 20th century, which was really global, and how it ended up in this very specific place in Fenway in Boston. So I'd encourage people to apply for the fellowship, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you for listening.